I will rise from waters deep into the saving arms of God. I will sing salvation songs. Jesus Christ has set me free.
I would invite you, if you have your Bibles, to be opening them up to Acts, the 12th chapter. Acts chapter 12 is where we'll turn our attention this morning. It is good to be back with you once again after what seems like an eternity that we've been gone. We've really only been gone for about a week and a half. We snuck in here last Wednesday, a week and a half ago for services. And then we're right back out the door for a couple days of study with some preachers in Fort Worth and then for a meeting in Wichita Falls. So it feels like it's been forever since we've been here. So it is good to be with each and every one of you. I appreciate Matt King filling in. Last week I heard he did a fantastic job. Matt told me when he texted me on Monday morning that somebody here, last name Hale, offered him my job. I don't know who that was. But he said he could have it. So I appreciate him declining that opportunity. I'll find out eventually who that was a little bit later. But I also appreciate Nathan for kind of spearheading the singing last Wednesday night, the song singing night that we had. And I appreciate everybody's calls and support, especially when Logan wasn't feeling well. He had a little bit of an episode last Saturday night, kind of going into Sunday. Nothing dangerous, nothing earth-shattering or anything like that, but certainly something that was very painful. And so we had several people here call, text, comment, whatever it may be. And so I appreciate the current concerns on his behalf. And so it's good to be back here, even though I was born in Wichita Falls. That's where I spent the first 5 years of my life. Had many people tell me that they used to care for me as a child, discipline me when I was a child. It's always good to be back what I consider my now home. And so I appreciate everybody. I appreciate the opportunity back here. Even though we were in Wichita Falls, I was aware of the events surrounding last week. I know that there was a rather big event that took place last Tuesday night. I was aware, and after the meeting we came back and watched until I think about 1 or 2 in the morning, the events of the election unfold. And so for certainly everybody here, that was, I'm sure, a moment of turmoil, a time of inner battle, depending on which side of the aisle that you were in. But regardless of whether you care about it, whether you not care about it, it is something that affects this country. And obviously right around 2 or 3 in the morning, I think whenever the elections or results kind of became finalized, the one thing that settled out at the end of the day is that Donald Trump is the next president of the United States. And I want everybody here for a second, kind of let that sink in, because I think 2 years ago that would have been crazy. I don't think any of us would have expected that. Maybe he did, but none of us would have expected that. Certainly over the 8 months of primary battles and another 4 or 5 months of a general election cycle, it was really just long. It took forever. And so I don't think any of us thought that at the end of it, Donald Trump would eventually be our next president. He'll take office here in a few months. Now, depending on which side of the aisle you're on, depending who you are and what you voted for, that can either be the best thing ever, or that's going to be the next coming of the apocalypse. So depending on which side of the aisle you're at, that's easily the best thing that's ever happened to this country or the worst thing that's ever happened to this country. I don't say that very loosely. I know that's easy for us to just kind of embellish these things, but certainly when you look at the reactions around the country, especially that night and the next couple of days, you can see people coming out of the woodwork and kind of giving their ideas about it. People that thought it was the worst thing ever, these are things that are kind of pulled from Twitter. But people that say it was the worst thing ever, one person wrote, for instance, if you support Trump, remember to block me, unfollow me, and never associate with me again because I don't need to, period, at all, period. Hashtag election night. That was what one person said in regards to Trump becoming elected. Another person said, I will never, actually, hashtag not my president, I will never have any respect for Donald Trump or ever call him my president, period. America is doomed. Now, first off, both of these people sound like lovely individuals. But second of all, I think the second one was a little bit on the kind of extreme line. To say that any kind of presidential election cycle will just end with America is doomed, I think that's a little bit of an exaggeration. But nevertheless, that's what these people felt. I blacked out their names for sake of a lot of things, number one being privacy. But these are how people felt that were very anti the election results. On the other side of the aisle, there are people that were very, very excited about it. For instance, this one person said he's only been president-elect for less than 12 hours and we've already avoided World War III. That's also a little bit extreme. But if you wonder if that's a little bit extreme, you're really going to like this next one, which says, hashtag retweet if you're as excited as I am for President Trump. This person just thinks that President Trump is the greatest thing to hit America since literally the invention of the American flag, the bald eagle that's carrying the assault rifle, which is fantastic, by the way, also the invention of the Sherman tank. They just think that Donald Trump is the greatest thing to hit America ever in the history of its existence. Now, I will tell you right at the forefront, I think that both of these reactions are a little bit extreme. I think both of us, or I think all of us probably fall somewhere right there in the middle section of this. I think most of us kind of fall in the, yeah, that's a really bad thing and I didn't vote for him, but whatever. Or the, I'm glad he was my kid, I voted for him, I'm glad he became president. Most of us are within that realm. Both of these are extremes. But as I thought about kind of how to characterize this sermon, I've been thinking about this sermon literally for the last 2 or 3 months, kind of going over different ideas in my head, and there were certainly things that you could have pulled from all different sources, whether you're talking about articles or Facebook statuses or Twitter or whatever you want to do. Everybody had an opinion on it. And I don't remember, and I'm only 30 years old, but I don't remember an event or a presidential election, certainly, that so galvanized this country. Everybody had an opinion. My grandpa, who we visited on Monday, who is 89 years old, told me for a solid 15 minutes which candidate he did not want to be elected and why he didn't want that person to be elected. So it seems like everybody has an opinion in some shape or form. But one thing I really want to grab hold of, and this is the way I've at least boiled all this down in my mind, is neither one of us need to look at the president. You could siphon Donald Trump, you could put Hillary Clinton's picture up there just as easily. None of us need to look at that election and think to ourselves, this is either the best thing that's ever happened or this is the worst thing that's ever happened. America is doomed or America is saved. We never need to go to either one of those two extremes. And I think a lot of people do. And so as I thought to characterize the sermon, how we're going to talk about this 4 or 5 days after the event happened, I kept settling back to Psalm 146 and verse 3, which says very simply, do not trust in princes, in mortal man, in whom there is no salvation. Regardless of whether or not you voted for Hillary or whether you voted for Donald Trump, both of these verses apply to all of these situations. I wrote this sermon specifically that I could have plucked out Trump and put Hillary in, or plucked out Hillary and put Trump in. That's the way I wrote this sermon. Because I wanted to apply to both sides of the aisle very equally. I understand what state I am. I understand what county I'm in, so I understand probably what I'm talking about. But I want to have both sides of the aisle equally attack this situation. Because neither one of us, whether you're for him or you're against him, neither one of us need to think that he's the end of the world or the thing that's going to save the entire world. Psalm 146 and verse 3 says very simply, do not trust in princes or mortal man in whom there is no salvation. I'm not here to debate the merits of a Donald Trump presidency. What I am here to do is to discuss the fact that my future in no way, my spiritual future, is no way determined by who sits in the Oval Office 4 months from now. That's the way that we need to look at it. And so depending on which way you look at it, if you're for Donald Trump, and I know there's a lot of people here that are for him, if you're looking at Donald Trump and you think that he was the right man for the job, that he was at least a little bit more qualified than Hillary, and one thing I thought was interesting was that this was the one election in which both candidates were so supremely disliked by almost everybody in the country. Whether you view Trump as being superior to Hillary in any form, shape, form, or fashion, there are people here this morning that I know that look at this and say that he's the right man for the job. But for those of you who think, on the extreme inches, that think he is going to save us, let me tell you something real quick. He is not going to save you. Now, let me qualify that statement very simply. I want you to look at Acts the 12th chapter. When you look at Acts chapter 12, what you see is something that's very similar to what happens in today's world. What we have in today's world is more or less, especially with presidential cycles, is a cult-like following. You have people that just gravitate towards one presidential candidate and follow him, barring everything else. It doesn't matter what he does. It doesn't matter what they say or he or she does. I know that both can apply. It doesn't matter what she says. It doesn't matter what he does. I will follow them into the depths of depravity because they're my candidate, or they're a Republican, or they are a Democrat. And so people would say, well, it doesn't matter what they do. I'm going to follow that person. Now, when you look at Acts chapter 12, I think you see a very similar type of statement here. In Acts chapter 12, it begins with the arrest of Peter and James. James is executed. But look down in verse 20. Acts chapter 12, starting in verse 20, it says, now he was very angry, talking about Herod, with the people of Tyre and Sidon, and with one accord they came to him, having won over Blastus, the king's chamberlain, and they were asking for peace because their country was fed by the king's country. There's a lot of historical artifacts within that verse. But basically what it amounts to is Herod is looking at another country that is dependent on his, and he tries to have this kind of over-dominating type of stance toward this country. They're not happy about it for whatever reason, and so they try to win over Herod's bedchamber person, kind of the head over his bedchamber, somebody who would have very distinctly the ear of Herod. And so he's not happy about it, but he does something about it, obviously. But there in verse 21, it says, on an appointed day, Herod, having put on his royal apparel, took his seat on the rostrum and began delivering an address to them. And the people responded in verse 22, the voice of a God and not of a man. Now, let me rephrase that for a second. What they're in essence saying is, as they're listening to Herod talk about this grand speech, he's probably talking about these people there in verse 20 that were asking him for food, these people that he was trying to assert his power and his authority off of. He delivers this exceptionally unique monologue, and people revere him not as a man, but as the voice of God himself. That's the attachment that they had towards him. And certainly if you look at some of the commentaries surrounding the presidential election cycle, that's the way people look at it. People think of Hillary as being the next greatest thing that is literally sent by God for this one specific purpose, or Donald Trump on the other side of the aisle, that he is gift from God for this specific purpose. And we attach maybe not this degree of praise, but certainly a high level of praise to these people and say, this is the one that's going to save us all. He is the Messiah. He is the one blessed by God. And when you look at verse 23, you see the reality, the ridiculousness of that statement when it says, immediately an angel of the Lord struck him because he did not give God the glory, and he was eaten by worms and he died. Now that's a very graphic scene. And whether you take that to mean he's literally standing in front of all of them and worms just kind of crawl up his body and they eat him, or you're talking about the simple decomposition process, regardless of what it is, at the end of the day, that guy's dead. The people that they revered, the people that they thought would be the one that would lead them into this great era where he would just have unquestioned support from the people. That's the guy that was eaten by worms and died. And not, I think, by accident. Verse 24 is on the back end. Because in verse 24, in contrast to that, it says, the word of the Lord continued to grow and to be multiplied. In contrast to what Herod did with his grandiose speech and his grandiose statement of what we're going to do and all these things politically that he says, and people revere him. In contrast to him being eaten by worms and dying, we have in verse 24 the opposite effect, that the word of the Lord, even though it's persecuted and looked down on, that's the thing that's continuing to grow and continuing to be multiplied. Somebody made a really good comment. This is a slight deviation, but somebody made a really good comment in regards to the election cycle, and I think it's very fitting. It's something all of us need to be thinking about. But can you imagine a world? Can you imagine a world where Christians are as adamant about salvation and defending Christ as they are in defending their presidential selection? All you have to do is look on Facebook and Twitter and see how valiantly people defend it. People will say, I will live by Trump, I will die by Hillary. You can switch that. I'm not trying to insinuate anything, but I will live or die by one of these two candidates. Can you imagine if Christian A, who takes such a hardline stance, even on somebody like Ted Cruz, who takes such a hardline stance on that, if they would come out with a Facebook post and say, I will live by Jesus Christ and I will die by Jesus Christ. And what he says where I will go, I will defend him in comments, I will defend him in conversations, I will defend him all over the place. Can you imagine a world where that was the case? But instead, for whatever reason, what we do as Americans oftentimes is ascribe this almost deistic acclamation towards these presidential candidates. And we say, for good or for worse, that they are the ones that are going to lead us into the promised land, that they are the ones that are going to take charge of us and give us everything that we need in this world. Now, don't get me wrong. The president can affect a lot of things, and I'm not here by any stretch of the imagination to diminish the impact that the president has. I'm a big fan of the presidency. Not always who's been in the presidency, but I'm a big fan of the presidency at large. I think it's fantastic. I think it's historical. I think there's so many unique qualities about it. But the president can affect a lot of things. Healthcare, taxes, war, whatever you want to do, can affect a lot of different things. The one thing that the president cannot do is save you from your sins. One thing that the president cannot do is give you an eternal salvation with him forever. The psalmist would talk about this in Psalm 60. If you would flip over there. Psalm 60, this psalm more or less would be repeated in a couple of occasions. Not just here in Psalm 60, but also repeated in other psalms. This type of idea. In Psalm 60, as I think the trumpeters, or I think as the worship leaders are taking with this, on a different page, I can't see who wrote it. But if you look at verse 9, what they're basically talking about is this idea of who's going to be the one that saves us. And look at verse 9 of Psalm 60. He says, who will bring me into the besieged city? Who will lead me to Edom? Have not you yourself, O God, rejected us? And will you not go forth with our armies, O God? And here's where it focuses in on verse 11. Oh, give us help against the adversary, for deliverance by man is in vain. That's the phrase you see repeated in other psalms. Verse 12, through God we shall do valiantly, and it is He who will tread down our adversaries. The one thing the Israelites understood, or needed to understand, rather, was that the only reason that they were even moderately successful as a nation was not because of David. David was a great guy. It didn't have anything to do with Solomon's wisdom that was given to him by God. Anything to do with Jehu or these great individuals. Those people had their individuals, or had their capabilities, had their qualities, because they were given to them by God. And the second they forgot about that, that's when God turned his back on them. And that's when God removed himself from that equation and said, if you think that you're great, if you think that you're powerful, then let's stand back and see what really happens to you as individuals. And I think sometimes because we have the most powerful military in the world, I've said several times, I believe that we live in the greatest country that the world has ever seen. I say that without shame in my voice. But I think sometimes because we live in this fantastic country, where we have freedoms, where we have a powerful military, where we have, for the most part, a government that represents us, that we think, for whatever reason, we don't really need God anymore. Why do I need God? I've got the American military. I've got Sherman tanks. I don't need God's hand. The one thing you see throughout history is that those people who put so much of their trust in man find themselves woefully inadequate when confronted with a future without him. Jeremiah 17th chapter is probably one of the best illustrations of this. Jeremiah is known as the weeping prophet. He's known that because he had a front row seat to basically the entire destruction of his homeland. He's very emotional about it. He's very upset about it. Jeremiah chapter 17, he has kind of a dichotomy here in these 4 verses. I think that speaks volumes about what our relationship should be with Christ. Jeremiah chapter 17, starting verse 5, he says, "Thus says the Lord." Notice these 2 different standpoints. Verse 5, "Thus says the Lord, cursed is the man who trusts in mankind, and makes flesh his strength, and whose heart turns away from the Lord. For he will be like a bush in the desert, and will not see when prosperity comes, and will live with stony wastes in the wilderness, a land of salt without inhabitant." Now let me clear the deck here for a second and tell you that I don't think anybody here this morning would ever, for a fraction of a second, take Donald Trump over God. I don't think anybody would say, well, we have Donald Trump, so I don't need God. I don't think any of us would actually come out and say that. But sometimes the importance that we ascribe to the presidency, and it's a very important role, and we should all vote, all that different stuff, the over-importance that we ascribe to governmental leaders oftentimes supersedes the importance that we give to God. When we will go out and vote, we'll put Facebook statuses, and we'll read up on current news, and we'll watch debates, and we will not, for any of that time period, spend 5 minutes reading our Bible. That's where the problem lays. The problem is not in the fact that we're voting. The problem is not in the fact that we pick this candidate or that candidate. The problem is when we don't give God an ounce of the respect that we give our presidential candidates. And in doing that, that's when we become victims of Jeremiah 17, 5 and 6, when he says, "Cursed be the one who puts their trust in man, and not rather in God." That's the problem. When you look at verse 7, here's the opposite. "Blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord, and whose trust in the Lord." Here's where you're about to find out why. Verse 8. "For he will be like a tree planted by the water," which that allusion is everywhere in the Psalms, "that extends its roots by a stream, and will not fear when the heat comes, but its leaves will be green, and it will not be anxious in the year of drought, nor cease to yield fruit." The one who puts their trust in God, the one who says to God, "You are my trust, you are my Savior, you are my hope, you are my deliverer, and I will treat you as such." That's the one who will be steadfast when whoever is the opposite candidate comes into power, you think to yourself the whole world's over. That's when that happens. That's when you're firm. That's when you're strong. Imagine a situation in which the entire American government just crumbles. And I think there probably, if the world stands, I think there will eventually be that point. Maybe it's 1,000 years, maybe it's 10,000 years down the road. But there may come a point where the entire system of democracy in America just crumbles. Who are you going to put your trust in? What happens if ISIS 1 billion times multiplies and invades Montana, comes in through there, and then descends towards the entire United States? I don't know why I picked Montana, by the way. I just picked it. But what happens if they come through there and overspread the entire world, and the American government is useless to do anything against it? Where's your hope and where's your trust going to be there? Because for most of American history, most of human history over the last 2,000 years, that has been a very real prospect in the lives of Christians everywhere. And Jeremiah chapter 17 meant something to them because it wasn't a fantastic military to back them up, but it was the fact that they had God on their side. Let me say something. I don't know if it's clear yet, but let me say something. Our enemy today, on November 13th, whatever it is, November 13th, 2016, our enemy today is not ISIS. Now, I understand it's physical, I'm not diminishing that. Our enemy today is not ISIS. Our enemy today is not Obamacare. Our enemy today is not somebody wanting to take our 501c tax status, and our enemy today is not global warming. You know who our enemy today is? The same enemy that was there 2,000 years ago. And that's sin. And the second that we begin to identify that as the real enemy and begin to live our life according to that mentality, that's when we'll be the people that God wants us to be. 2 Kings chapter 18 was a time in Israel's history that was very, very dark. It was actually a very bright time for a period, but then it went very, very dark very quickly. Because in 2 Kings chapter 18, you have a story that's repeated in 2 Chronicles, you have it repeated in Isaiah. This is the time that Sennacherib, 2 Kings chapter 18, would show up at Jerusalem's doorstep, and according to his black obelisk that's been preserved for the last 3,000 years, that's the time that he would shut up Jerusalem like a bird in a cage. And when you look at what was going on in that time period, that's exactly the description that took place. Sennacherib was most likely marching from Assyria all the way through Jerusalem, through Judea, going down towards Egypt, who was his real enemy. But along the way, what he took alongside him was 300,000, roughly, of the strongest warriors that he had. That's a huge army by anybody's standpoint. It was certainly 2,500 years ago. And in 2 Kings chapter 18, starting in verse 17, you have this army that rises up towards Israel's doorstep. Starting in verse 17, what happens is this herald, which every army employed in that time, a herald that would go out, that would try to make terms of peace, but sometimes just insult the nation. But this herald begins to speak up. And listen to what this Assyrian herald starts to say. Starting in verse 17, king of Assyria sent Tartan, Rapsaros, and Rabshakeh from Lachish to King Hezekiah with a large army to Jerusalem. They came up and came to Jerusalem. And when they went up, they stood by the conduit of the upper pool, which is on the highway of the forest field. That would be important if you were a Jew to know where this happened. Verse 18, when they called the king, Eliakim the son of Hilkiah, who was over the household, Shebna the scribe, and Joah the son of Asaph the recorder came out to him. You have Rabshakeh and the other heralds meeting some heralds and some emissaries for King Hezekiah. This is what Rabshakeh says in verse 19. Rabshakeh said to them, say now to Hezekiah, thus says the great king, the king of Assyria, what is this confidence that you have? You say, but they are only empty words, that I have counsel and strength for the war. Now on whom do you rely that you have rebelled against me? That's a fantastic question. Now behold, you rely on the staff of this crushed reed, even on Egypt. That's where Jerusalem had put their strength, at least in part. On which if a man leans, it will go into his hand and pierce it. So is Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to all who rely on him. There's some truth to that. Verse 22, but if you say to me, we trust in the Lord our God, is it not he whose places and whose altars Hezekiah has taken away, and has said to Judah and Jerusalem, you shall worship before this altar in Jerusalem? That's true to a certain extent. Hezekiah had obliterated the Baals and the Ashtoreths, all the idolatry, and reinstituted temple worship. So he's right on a certain extent. Verse 23, now therefore come and make a bargain with my master the king of Assyria, and I will give you 2,000 horses, and notice the condescension, if you are able on your part to send riders on them. How can you then repulse one official, the least of my master's servant, and rely on Egypt for chariots and for horsemen? Have I now come up without the Lord's approval against this place to destroy it? The Lord said to me, go up against this land and destroy it. Rabshakeh is putting a monumental amount of importance, not only in the clout that he has as being an Assyrian, but also on the clout that he has directly from what he deems as God himself. He says, God told me to come up and take this. He's appealing not just to military, but the spiritualistic idols that they would have had in their country as well. You can see where Rabshakeh is going. Jump down to verse 28. Rabshakeh stood and cried out with a loud voice in Judean, now the tongue that they would have, saying, hear the word of the great king. He's now speaking to everybody, the king of Assyria. Thus says the king, do not let Hezekiah deceive you, for he will not be able to deliver you from my hand. Nor let Hezekiah make you trust in the Lord, saying, the Lord will surely deliver us, and this city will not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria. Don't let Hezekiah tell you that. Verse 31, do not listen to Hezekiah, for thus says the king of Assyria, make your peace with me, come out to me, each of you let him eat of his own vine, each of his fig tree, drink of the water of his own cistern, until I come and take you away to a land like your own land. A land of grain, new wine, a land of bread and vineyards, a land of olive trees and honey, that you may live and not die. That sounds strikingly like the characterization of the promised land for Canaan. But do not listen to Hezekiah when he misleads you, saying, the Lord will deliver you. Now listen to this. Now he's harping on Assyria's past military conquest. Has any of the gods, verse 33, of the nations delivered his land from the hand of the king of Assyria? For where are the gods of Hamath and Arpad? Where are the gods of Sepharvaim, Hena and Iblah? Have they delivered Samaria from my hand? Who among all the lands have delivered their land from my hand, that the Lord should deliver Jerusalem from my land? What he's appealing to now in this instance, Rabshakeh, is You say that you have trust in your God. But in what other gods that we've gone through, has any of those gods ever once delivered them out of their hand? We've gone through this place, we've gone through this place, we've gone through this place, and they've all said the exact same thing that you did, which is our God will deliver us. Did any of their gods deliver you? And he's speaking to the mass of Israel at this point. If you're sitting in Israel and you're citizen A and you're listening to this speech from Shechem, and you know that 300,000 people roughly are surrounding your city, you have to be aware of the fact that that is a very real threat. You haven't been living the way you should. You know your nation has not been living the way you should. That is a very real threat for you. But what did Hezekiah not do? Hezekiah not for 1 second. He actually stopped the tributes that were going to Sennacherib. He never for 1 second, you know what? I think you're right. You know, God says he's with us, and he says he's powerful, but I don't really believe that. What Hezekiah did was put his trust in God, and within a matter of days, weeks, whatever that specific timeline is that I can't remember, within a very, very short time period, an angel of the Lord went out into the camp of Sennacherib and killed 250,000 of their soldiers in one single night. No army can do that. No human, man-made army can accomplish a feat like that in one single night. And yet that was the deliverance that God did. When you look at this from both sides of the aisle, whether you're in Israel, whether you're in Syria, it's very easy for both sides to look at it and say, our king is great, our king is holy, our king is powerful, and he will deliver us the victory. But in the end, it had nothing to do with the military rulers in Israel. It had nothing to do with Sennacherib. It had nothing to do with his military prowess and all the lands he had overcome. Their deliverance came from God himself. So if you're sitting here this morning, and you're thinking to yourself, Donald Trump is the greatest thing to hit America since the Sherman tank, and you think to yourself, he will guide us into a period of untold prosperity, and I will never have to worry about anything ever again physically, then you're putting your trust in the wrong thing. Because Donald Trump, like every human being, can die. That's not an endorsement. Please don't misunderstand me. But Donald Trump, like every single human being, will eventually perish to this earth. Our government, at some point in the future, whether it's by God's hand or by just the natural course of events, our government will perish. And in that day, where will your trust lie? In that day, where will your hope and where will your security stay? If you're sitting here thinking to yourself, that God, we don't need God because Donald Trump will save us, you are in for a rude awakening. And I would heartily encourage you to change your mindset on the other side of the aisle. And I know full well who I'm talking to this morning. I saw the voter count from Texas. I know that there's a good chance that the people I'm voting or I'm talking with here today, or the people that you'll meet on the streets, probably voted for Trump. What about the other side of the aisle? When you woke up to Wednesday morning, besides the ridiculous protests and the cry-ins that people were having, which I think is ridiculous on a number of levels, but what you had was a large body of population that were very, very scared. They were very upset at the election. And I'm not here to demean them. I'm not here to call them, except for the ones that were actually having cry-ins. That's just babies. They're just babies. But the ones that were genuinely worried, the ones that were genuinely upset, and I think still had optimism, but were genuinely upset. A lot of them viewed the election results as being the first sign of the apocalypse, Donald Trump infiltrating the White House, and then the end of the world is sure to come afterwards. And I saw statuses like that. I saw Twitter tweets. I saw tweets like that. But for those people, I would tell you, Donald Trump will not destroy you either. And that may be a very real fear for a lot of people. Just for a lot of people will say that Donald Trump will be the one that will save us, and that he'll be the one that will deliver us. Donald Trump will not destroy you either. And I think that's a hard thought for us to have. This is pertinent to us specifically, I think. Because we live in this world right now where Republicans control the House. We control the Senate, and we control the presidency, and so we think to ourselves that everything is fantastic. Everything will be that way. Or everything will be great. But there may come a reality within 4 years that that's not the case anymore. There may come a reality when Republicans don't dominate every single thing on the face of the earth. And so at that point, you may be thinking to yourself, now in 2016, well, this point doesn't apply to me. Say this point back in your mind for 2020, when it could be a very real reality. And remember the fact that no matter what happens in your life, Donald Trump will not destroy you. Hillary Clinton will not destroy you. The Democrat candidate for office that will eventually take office will not destroy you. It's hard for us, I think, in today's world to conceptualize the environment that the Christians existed in the first century. But you see on a very apocalyptic level in Revelation, the 12th chapter. Revelation is about a lot of things, and you can argue that it's about this, about that. I'm not here today to argue that necessarily. I think that misses the point. Because at the end of the day, the whole message of the book of Revelation, no matter what section you jump into, no matter really how you take it, the overall point of Revelation is God wins. That's the whole point. That's what Revelation was written for, was to say that in that day or this day, that God always wins. And that means something today, and it meant something 2,000 years ago. Revelation, the 12th chapter, this is a great way to conceptualize the attack that Satan and that the Roman government put on the church. It says here in Revelation 12, he's using very old imagery, so keep in mind these are symbols. Revelation 12, starting verse 1, a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, on her head a crown of 12 stars, and she was with child, she cried out, being in labor and pain to give birth. The woman there most likely typifies the people of God. Verse 3, the red dragon. Another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon having 7 heads, 10 horns. On his heads were 7 diadems, and his 12 tails swept away a third of the stars of heaven, threw them to the earth, and the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she gave birth, he might devour her child. That's what's happening here. That the people of God are right there, that they're about to give forth this Messiah, but Satan is ready, not off in the bushes somewhere, right there, ready to eat the child immediately after it's delivered. Verse 5, she gave birth to a son, a male child, who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and to his throne. The woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God, so that there she would be nourished for 1,260 days. Now what this is, more or less, is a characterization of the fact that as the Messiah came forth, Satan was ready to pounce, ready to destroy, ready to consume. But what did God do? God intervened and protected that child. God protected that baby so that there would be the salvation for mankind would always be preserved. And that was something that to the early church was very important to them. Look at verse 7. There was war in heaven. Michael and his angels waging war with the dragon. The dragon and his angels waged war, and they were not strong enough, and there was no longer a place found for them in heaven. The great dragon was thrown down, the serpent of old, who is called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation, the power, the kingdom of our God, and the authority of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren has been thrown down, he who accuses them before our God day and night. And they overcame him, verse 11, because of the blood of the Lamb and because of the word of their testimony, and they did not love their life even when faced with death. This is the application for us. Verse 12, for this reason rejoice, O heavens, and you indwell in them. Woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, knowing that he only has a short time. These people in the first century church needed to understand that God always wins. But when you got the Roman government, that is by far the strongest government that has ever existed on the face of the earth up until that point, not only hating you, not only persecuting you, but willing to go to all corners of the earth and use every means available to give you the most gruesome death possible. At that point in your life, you begin to think that God has left the situation. There's so much immorality, there's so much apostasy, there's so much blasphemy that God can't possibly be here anymore. And what Revelation needed to remind these people about was that even though it may seem that God isn't real, that he's not here anymore, the truth of the matter is that it will always, always, always get better. I've heard people say for whatever reason, and I'm using this term very pejoratively, so I'm not trying to say anything off color when I say this, but I've heard people say that literally this earth is hell. And I've heard people say that over and over. You've heard people say that. You've heard people describe it like that. And they usually describe it because the situation around them is just so awful and it's just so unbearable that they can't imagine that God would be here. But let me tell you something right now. Hell is not a place where God is. So the simple fact that this earth exists, the simple fact that there's birds outside, the simple fact that creation still operates, means that God is still here with us. And as long as the world spins, as long as he hasn't come back, God will always be a part of this world. But there may come a point in time where we begin to think that the situation in our life has gotten so unbearable and is so reprehensible that God certainly doesn't exist anymore. It's in those days that we need to remember that our president, whoever he or she may be, in the huge span of time, does not affect our eternal salvation. God does. And as long as we put our trust, our hope in him, nothing bad can happen. I want you to look at 1 John chapter 4. We're going to skip Psalm 118. I would encourage you to look at that. Look at 1 John 4. 1 John chapter 4 is a great expose to talk about the idea of false teachers and false teachers that are in this world. 1 John chapter 4 teaches the same thing roughly that we mentioned in Revelation 12. The idea that God always wins, that He's supreme, that He rules everything. 1 John chapter 4, starting verse 1, he said, "Beloved, do not believe every spirit. Test the spirits to see whether they're from God, because many false spirits have gone into the world. By this you know the Spirit, that every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God, and every spirit that does not confess Jesus is not from God. That is the spirit of the Antichrist, of which you have heard that it is coming, and now is already in the world." Two divisions of people. And one may seem more powerful than the other. But look at verse 4. "You are from God, little children, and have overcome them, because greater is He who is in you than he who is in the world." We may think for whatever reason that because the Roman government is bearing down on us, that is tearing us apart, that this country is just eating us alive, Christians, inside out, we may think that God is more powerful than this world. 1 John chapter 4, verse 4, Revelation, the entire book, tells us that it is patently not the case. Because greater is He who is in you than he who is in the world. Now you may think to yourself, for whatever reason, that's great, Brady. I understand that when the world becomes dark and persecution gets really strong and people are starting to be thrown into prison or even executed because of their beliefs, I understand that that's the day that I need to stay strong. Those are the times. That's not what's happening right now, Brady. What's happening right now is not this dark persecution that seeks to destroy you as an individual. What's happening now is the legalization of homosexual marriages. Or the legalization of abortion, both of which are completely anathema. But what's happening is, and that's what I need to fight this world right now, Brady, that if he gets in or she gets in, she's going to legalize all these things, and that's going to be the end of the world. And that may be the case. Let me tell you this too, as a bit of a side note. I think something like that can happen just easily with a Republican, as I think it can with a Democrat, or it will at least in the future. But that being said, none of those stances, and nothing about the illegality or the legality of certain situations, dictates you as a Christian. The Roman government was far more reprehensible than the United States is today. That may be a very unpopular statement. But the Roman government not only advocated abortion, it also made it possible. It encouraged, in certain areas, homosexuality. It legalized prostitution, and any other number of all sorts of immoralities that you can possibly think of. And the reason for bringing all that up is, if people could live in that day and age and be a Christian, then you can too. Hebrews chapter 13 speaks to this, the individuality that we have as Christians. Hebrews chapter 13. As he just gets done talking about the intense persecution that happens to all Christians, and all the different things that they need to be aware of, and how chastening is actually a good thing for them. Hebrews chapter 13, starting verse 1, he starts to give a very bullet point list of things that you can do. This is why, by the way, people think that Paul wrote it, because this is something he does a lot in the end of letters, have a very bullet point type of list of things that people can do. Starting verse 1, though, he says, "Let love of the brethren continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by this some have entertained angels without knowing it. Remember the prisoners, as though in prison with them, and those who are ill-treated, since you yourselves are also in the body. Marriage is to be held in honor among all. The marriage bed is to be undefiled. Fornicators and adulterers God will judge." Verse 5, "Make sure that your character is free from the love of money, being content with what you have. For he himself has said," notice if this sounds familiar, "I will never desert you, nor will I ever forsake you, so that we may confidently say, the Lord is my helper, I will not be afraid. What can man do to me?" If you're looking for one point to sum up point 2, this is the one you need to grab hold of. "I have put my trust in God. He will not disappoint." Let me characterize it a better way and actually stop going off the cuff. When we look back at verse 6, this is the point. "The Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What will man do to me?" If you're looking for one phrase to characterize the second point, that's it. Because in this time of intense persecution, where governments were bearing down, people were telling you that it was wrong to live the way that you're living, and it was even wronger for you to judge other people who were living opposite. Hebrews chapter 13 says, in the midst of all that persecution, you remember the prisoners. You treat marriage as honorable above all. You make sure that your character is free from the love of money, and you do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, and you let love of the brethren continue. Basically, a loose summarization of various tenets of what it means to be a Christian in the first place. And if those people can exist in that time and be Christians, then I guarantee you that no matter what happens to you, in this day and age or the next day and age, you can survive as a Christian too. On November 20th, 2017, there will be an inauguration. And Donald Trump will come down 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, down that street, and he will lead a loose 30-car motorcade of various people waving to everybody. And then he will ascend the South Lawn of the U.S. Capitol building, and he will go up into this gigantic podium attended by various dignitaries of the states, governors, senators, distinguished military people, all these different dignitaries. And he will accompanied by 800 to 1.8 million people on the lawn that will listen to him and hang on his every word as he gives forth the direction that this country is heading. But 2,000 years ago, a separate procession took place. And it wasn't Donald Trump visiting with all these various dignitaries. It was Jesus Christ ascending in towards the gates of Jerusalem on the back of a donkey. And he didn't meet with foreign dignitaries to try and chart the course of Israel. What he came to do, in a loose phrase, was to deliver on the only campaign promise that mattered, which is to secure the hope of salvation for every single last one of us. That's the only campaign promise that matters. And that's the only thing that we can really truthfully hang our hat on in this world or in the next. To the point I'm asking you today, who are you voting for? I know that's probably a weird statement, a weird question to ask. But who are you casting your vote for? Are you putting it in the hopes of men? Or are you putting it in the hopes of women? Or are you putting it in the hopes of Jesus Christ, who secured the only thing that can't be ripped away from us ever by any means, spiritual or physical, and that's salvation. If you put your hope and your trust in Him, then no matter what happens in 4 years, or 40 years, or 400 years, nothing of that will matter. If we can help you make your salvation sure once you come, you say,
I will rise from waters deep into the saving arms of God. I will sing salvation songs. Jesus Christ